few seconds.
Okay.
3, 2, 1.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to our By Design event. We're really excited to have everyone here and to welcome our guests, Claudia Pasquero, Elif Erdine, and Mitch Joachim. Before we get started, I would like to say a few words about biodesign and introduce all of our speakers. Claudia Pasquero is an architect, author, and educator. Her work and research operates at the intersection of biology, computation, and design. She is founder and co-director of Ecologic Studio in London, lecturer and director of Urban Morphogenesis Lab at the Bartlett UCL, professor of landscape architecture, and founder of the Synthetic Landscape Lab at Innsbruck University. Claudia has been head curator of the Tallinn Architectural Biennale 2017, and she's been nominated in the Wired Smart List in the same year. She is co-author of Systemic Architecture Operating Manual for a Self-Organizing City, published by Rootlake in 2012. Her work has been published and exhibited internationally at the FRAC Center in New Orleans, the Venice Architectural Biennale, ZKM Karlsruhe, and Milano Expo 2015, among others. Ecologic Studio has in recent years completed a series of photosynthetic architectures that she will tell us more in her presentation about. Joachim. Dr. Joachim is co-founder of TERREFORMI, professor at NYU, and author of Design with Life, Biotech Architecture and Resilient Cities. Formerly, he was an architect at the offices of Frank Gehry and I.M. Pei. He has been awarded a Fulbright Scholarship and Fellowship with TED, Moshe Safdie, and Martin's Society for Sustainability, MIT. He was chosen by Wired magazine for the Smart List and selected by Rolling Stone for the 100 People Who Are Changing America. Mitch won many awards, including Architecture RD Award, AIA New York Urban Design Merit Award, Architecture A+ Award, and Time Magazine's Best Innovations with MIT Smart Cities, and many, many more. He's featured as the Now 99 in Dwell Magazine and 50 Under 50 Innovators of the 21st Century by Images Publishers. He co-authored 4 books: Design with Life, Biotech, Architecture and Resilient Cities, XXL to XS, New Directions in Ecological Design, Supercells, Building with Biology, and Global Design, Elsewhere Envisioned. His design work has been exhibited at MoMA and the Venice Biennale. He earned a PhD at Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MAUD at Harvard University, and MArch at Columbia University. And then last but not least, Elif Erdine. Elif Erdine is an architect, designer, and researcher. She's the director of Emergent Technologies and Design Postgraduate Program, MTech, at the Architecture Association School of Architecture. The research agenda of MTech focuses on investigating new synergies of architecture and ecology through the critical intersection of computational design and fabrication. During 2010 to 2015, Elif Erdine conducted her PhD at the Architectural Association PhD in Design program titled Generative Process in Tower Design, Algorithms for the Integration of Tower Subsystems. Since 2010, she has been directing various AA visiting school programs in Istanbul and others, exploring generative design techniques, integration of algorithmic design methods with large-scale digital fabrication tools. She has worked for Zaha Hadid Architects during 2006 until 2010 and received her bachelor's from Istanbul Technical University with high honors, and her MArch degree from the AA Design Research Lab AADRL in 2016. So please join me in welcoming all of our guests. And now I would like to say a few introductory words why we are coming together today. After departing into outer space last week with space architecture, we are back to Earth today. Our planet is a fascinating game of complexity, a beautiful, diverse world of organisms that live within and among us. Our planet is full of life. We live in a world of life that constructs itself, and that is not abstract as human thought suggests. We ourselves carry large numbers of organisms in our bodies. 8% of our own DNA is of viral origin. In fact, we are deeply interconnected with other life forms and with non-living matter that shapes life. Today, our biodesign panel investigates how humans and non-human species can not only cohabitate, but benefit from their mutual connections through design. The thinkers we invited today think beyond traditional categories and build new connections between design and biology, discussing new biological systems, how they can help humans to engage in the complexities of our world, and forge new meaningful connections between the living and non-living to address issues in our lives, like environmental destruction, overproduction, and consumption. To co-create a better, common, and still possible past, present, and future. So please join me in welcoming our guests. And we would like to start with a presentation by Elif Erdine, followed by Mitch Joachim and Claudia Pasquero. And then we will come together again to have a small discussion and open for questions from the audience. So if you have questions, please post them in the YouTube or Bilibili chat, and we'll try to address all of them. Thank you so much.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, very well.
Perfect. I had to turn my video off because my internet is slightly unstable, so apologies for that.
No problem.
So let me share my screen. First of all, thank you for the introduction, Viktoria. I'm very happy to be here. I will approach the topic based on our research in MTech, Emerging Technologies and Design is an MSc, Master of Science, Master of Architecture, postgraduate program at the AA, as Viktoria has mentioned. And we basically have a range of architects, engineers, people from different backgrounds joining our program. And our focus is on developing, let's say, skills and pursue knowledge in architectural design science that is located in new production paradigms. So this is just a brief introduction about our course. And of course, the way we approach complex design problems in MTech is through computation and advanced fabrication. This is a 60-month long research program, so obviously I'm going to do a very basic summary for you in 10 minutes. And I will focus on some of the, let's say, core methods and principles that we focus on while we approach complex design problems. And one of them is obviously biomimetics. And biomimetics, the study of, includes the study of emergence, generative design processes, bottom-up design, and particularly for the past 3 or 4 years, our research agenda has revolved on social insects and looking at social insect systems such as termites, ants, wasps, and looking at their behaviors, their construction behavior, sequences, and really understanding, abstracting principles from social insects and applying them for advanced computational systems. And these computational systems obviously include agent-based design systems. So what we focus on is, as I mentioned, studying the basic principles of behavior in insect systems, social insect systems, extracting and abstracting principles from them, and then looking into ways of applying them for architectural and structural systems. So these are just some brief examples of our student work. In this case, for example, looking at wasp nest building behavior, extracting the logic of this as a cellular automata computational system. As you know, cellular automata are also very well-known computational systems that are applicable for these kinds of problems. And really, afterwards, focusing on extracting these principles into, first of all, 2D rule sets, simulating the 2D rule sets, and then developing them into 3D rule sets and 3D architectural systems. And of course, these are very much iterative processes, I must say, so they require a lot of testing. And this is really the basis of experimentation. And what we do is we investigate the influences, let's say, of external and internal stimuli at the level of these either the individual insect or as a team mechanism, and identifying hierarchies of behavior and extracting these hierarchies into architectural systems. And of course, they also include a lot of, like I said, analysis, in this case, structural analysis, environmental analysis, so on and so forth. The second topic that I want to discuss today is, again, this is something that we heavily work with in MTech, is genetic algorithms. And this topic involves, obviously, complex systems complexity, evolutionary computation, multi-objective optimization, machine learning, and also a tool that Wall-E that has been developed in MTech Studio by our PhD researchers that is specifically geared towards multi-objective optimization and its analysis. So through evolutionary computation, we look at, as I mentioned, complex design problems that have multiple conflicting criteria, and how we can, again, iteratively generate solutions, candidates, and then start to analyze them. And these tools, I must say, are scalable. So as you saw earlier on, they can be applied to, let's say, material systems, in that case, robotic fabrication constraints, and they can go up to urban systems, understanding the performance of a building in its context, with its neighboring buildings, looking into, again, environmental, let's say, constraints such as, sunlight or shading or generating voids. Exploring, like I said, the building in its context. And what I must stress here is that these are really complex problems in terms of the fact that there might be conflicting criteria that might not be solved, let's say, through a single objective optimization processes. That's why we focus on multi-objective optimization processes. And why are we doing all this? What is the point of, applying these algorithms and complex methods? Is because we are very much interested in building a multi-scalar approach to design. And that obviously includes the exploration of material systems, moving forward the distribution of material systems in ecologically sensitive contexts, dealing with, environmental challenges, climate change, sea level rise, moving up to contextualizing them in an architectural context, so exploring vernacular architecture, but also trying to answer how we can reinterpret vernacular architecture by using these new technologies and tools. And again, moving up another scale, looking at exploring their urban distribution, architectural urban distribution, by taking into consideration, as I mentioned, environmental challenges, contextual challenges, and really trying to formulate a bottom-up design approach that can address these different scales of material, architecture, and ecological urbanism. And I want to finish this short presentation with a question. As you know, this manifesto from 100 years ago was focusing on the fact that, every generation must build its own city. So what we are trying to answer is, by using these tools and methods, the question of how are we going to build our own cities in the future. So I want to finish with this. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Okay, should I go? Is it the?
Sure, sorry. Go ahead, Mitch.
That was a great presentation. I think mine might be slightly longer, but I'll try and keep it at the same amount. Does this, can you guys see this okay?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. So I'm co-founder of a 501c3 nonprofit in Brooklyn, New York called TerreForm1. We work on wicked problems that affect ecological conditions in cities. This is Hurricane Sandy, which is something that we had been studying before it happened and certainly afterwards. We have a mission that deals with this single overriding predicate, which is wildlife population is at half the amount of living things since the 1970s. So that's every bird, fish, mammal, insect on this planet has pretty much disappeared. That is a problem. I think we're all complicit. That's architects, urban planners, urban designers, folks in real estate, anyone that's doing something in cities. We are certainly partly responsible for that. Our mission is to design against extinction. So everything we do is to think about the impact we have on the environment. Here is one of our speculative forms of urbanism looking at the future of 42nd Street in New York. We have a riparian corridor going through the center. We get rid of all of the traffic associated with that street, replace high throughput systems with of movement with trackless trains here. We have grand civic spaces that respect pedestrianism. We have vertical gardens for food and for air quality. We also have vertical access wind turbines and solar cells, and a modicum of automation that helps deal with the maintenance of these things. One of the more recent projects we did for TED was for the countdown, which we have around 7 years, according to the United Nations, to deal with climate change. How does that affect living species? Well, we produce these anti-extinction archives that contain inside them everything you would need for a specific species to jumpstart its population again. It won't save these species from oblivion. These are red listed creatures that are going extinct, but it would give them a chance to survive. The major point is to communicate to the public that they're disappearing. So here's one of these eggs that we planted in the Navy Yard. The eggs create this kind of semiotic pulse so people can know that there's something inside it. And then after 7 years of life, the outer shell decays. Inside contains these cryogenically frozen embryos that are fertilized, along with everything necessary for its biotope. There's seed bombs and the appropriate soil. So that over time, as the egg decays, it slowly leaks out the elements necessary for these creatures to get a jump in their population and give them a chance to repopulate their local ecosystems. This is one of many projects that we work on to help educate the public what's happening with our environment. And here it is installed in the Navy Yard. Another thing we're looking at was at a radically different scale is population itself. This is human population, roughly going to reach 11 billion humans on the planet. That's even with COVID-19 affecting us. What does that mean for our cities? How will we live? How will we move? What will we eat? We did these analog maps that were computationally driven by E. coli. So we used transgenic E. coli to do one-to-one mapping between populations of humans and colonies of E. coli. Bioluminescence show existing populations. This is actually Istanbul, and that's the dark red. And then the green is the expanded version of Istanbul when you expect population to reach over 11 billion humans worldwide. Here we are trying to shape and grow E. coli into specific geometries, eventually using these templates that made from CAD files with the mapped population of colonies of E. coli to those specific constraints, and then fitting them out onto a map of the world that treats every city as one contiguous city across the entire globe. And this is all grown from E. coli. The densest cities on planet Earth have been mapped specifically. And then we have USB 400 times microscopes that show in detail that growth and the change of growth over time. On the front of the map is a parametric graph that shows the shift in population. Those big spikes show areas that we can expect radical growth across the Earth. This is the Dymaxion map. And then the dark areas are areas of shrinkage where we can expect populations to disappear. Another live organism that we work with in every project, we're working with live organisms, was this one here. They were our client. It's a cricket. And here the goal was to eat our client. Why would you eat crickets? Well, we need an alternate form of protein. We can't live off of cows, pig, chicken, and meat all the time. The United Nations has also asked us to do that. 2013, they're asking for Europe and the United States to wean ourselves off of cows and think of eating insect-based protein along with vegetable-based proteins. So when you eat cricket flour, not actual crickets, but flour that's made from crickets, you save 2,000 gallons of water for the same gram of protein you get from a cricket versus a cow. Also 300 grams less greenhouse gas emissions for crickets versus cows. So we produce this architecture of a cricket farm and shelter. Each one of these 320 units inside there contain their off-the-shelf units. They're made of PET plastic, infinitely recyclable, allow crickets to grow for 6 weeks. They die naturally. They're harvested and they're milled into a fine powder and made into bonbons, spaghetti, bagels, some of the best food I've ever tried. We feed them orange peels and lime rinds and apple cores, so their gut metabolism actually changes their flavor. So when we mill them into a food, we're eating very tasty creatures. Here we have a patent on this dialogue system that allows the crickets to move freely throughout the shelter, and then at their end of life, when they get big, fat, and juicy, we consume them. How do we know they're happy? We know they're happy when the males are no longer worried about surviving and they're looking for females. They do something called stratylation. They get horny and they start chirping. So the entire shelter is chirping. It means they're looking to reproduce. They meet in something here called the cricket sex pod, which is these devices you could see in the corner. And in that sex pod, they meet females, they reproduce and spread their genetics throughout the shelter. The entire system is self-reliant. Another system we're looking at that's also bio-based is bringing food to your home, especially in urban areas. So instead of a green wall, we have a green ball. These are pods from 4 feet to 14 feet in radii, and they grow anything on the outside that would be a high yield crop, such as spirulina, arugula, different mints, etc. So you go from pasture to plate very quickly, as opposed to farming systems that are 100 miles outside of our cities. You can also do test tube agronomy. You can grow food from cells instead of saplings or seeds. You can also grow food on the interior. So we've got 9 columns of sub-irrigation that trickle down to these double skin pots that essentially feed the plants through a wicking system. There's also grow lights and on the interior and the exterior, so you can control the growth of the food that you're making. And another project we're looking at with another live organism is a combination of mycelium and acetobacter. And here we're making chairs. So we go from old school chairs to mid-century chairs to the future. We think of industrial design, which is growing and designing things in a lab. So here we're combining, and this is our novel research work that we did for the International Genetic Engineering Machines competition. We combine basically the root base of reishi, make mycelium, with acetobacter, which is essentially a bacteria-expressed cellulosic structure. And they make a hydrophilic system that you can produce chairs with. This is one of my daughters sitting on those chairs, and it's a chair that you can eat. So imagine what it was like in her kindergarten when she brought in a chair that daddy made, and then she told the kids that you can eat it. I want you to know that biotech is real, it's available, and it's safe. We then did chairs for adults that are much larger in scale, triply curved mycelium structures, that are made off of bamboo templates. And here you are in another chair that when you're done with this chair, you throw it into a garden and it feeds thousands of other forms of life, unlike IKEA chairs, which end up in a landfill. And finally, the last two projects are looking at housing systems made out of technology that's 2,500 years old. It's grafting inosculate matter to form one contiguous vascular system, or grafting trees to precise geometries to make dwellings. We attach them to old growth trees on a site, and there's no distinction between the landscape and the home. They're essentially one. We use what we call bioreactors to grow woody plant matter in these dark chambers that are moist and wet. We get them to about 3 meters in length. We essentially tease the roots of woody plants, in this case ficus or willows. So their taproot grows and grows and grows. They never find soil. They have a very long wet spaghetti noodle that we then wrap on scaffolding. This is the newest rendition of this project, which is clusters of willows that are grafted together and then fitted to CNC scaffolding to a precise geometry that maps itself to a building structure. Here it is in a horse farm. We're growing this system in upstate New York. It's made out of these willow clusters attached to old growth trees. The windows are an algae-based plastic. And this is a home that is essentially made from entirely living structure. You can see some of the horses here that are done for scale. The other wood components are a component called plyboo, which is essentially a plywood-based construction material, and that makes the central core for the kitchen and the bathroom. And then the last two bio-based design systems that we're working on, and there are many more, is using mealworms to eat styrofoam waste. They do that, thank you, Stanford. Mealworms eat the waste, they turn it into frass, they eat it again, and then they eat their own frass, and they poop that out, or produce feces, sorry, and that feces becomes compostable material for your garden. So we turn styrofoam, which is a very difficult material, especially in urban areas, to recycle. We naturally use mealworms to digest it and turn it into garden material. Then the mealworms turn into beetles and they're eaten by birds. So this is an installation we're doing in Camden, New Jersey, which has a serious problem with waste, especially in empty lots, especially with styrofoam. So here people can donate their waste to our facility and watch it get consumed by the worms. Our last project is very much about design against extinction. It's saving the monarch butterfly from oblivion. We've lost 90 million of these creatures in the last few years. They're almost going extinct. So we've created a facade system that is a sanctuary for monarchs. We've been doing this work with the American Museum of Natural History, designing their feeders for their butterfly exhibit and their whole new insectarium, which is coming online in a few years from now. We work at scale with different butterflies, looking at areas of respite, perch points, mud baths, which butterflies like taking mud baths. I guess we all do once in a while. Areas for sexual reproduction, and essentially creating safe zones so they get a chance at life. Monarchs are disappearing because we destroy their habitat. So we put in a vertical mosaic, a biotope mosaic inside the skin of this building using different concrete materials with BASF. We did this project along with our client in Soho with the Triennial at Cooper Hewitt, and you could see the full-scale facade system working with monarch butterflies inside it. So it's a butterfly garden in the interstitial space of your facade. You look out these windows, the bioplastic areas for nectar feeding, etc., for the butterflies, and they enjoy that space and are given a chance to repopulate the local population. Of course, there's all other types of biodiversity going on there, and that's the point. We want to increase biodiversity as much as possible. I think that's the mission of Terreform and the mission of our work. And these are real monarchs. Anyway, thank you very much for listening. I look forward to seeing the final presentation and then having discussion afterwards. Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Claudia?
Yes, I'm here.
Are you able to share your screen?
Yeah, I can screen now. 1 second. Cool. Can you see my screen?
Perfect.
Perfect. Hi, thanks for the invitation. I'm very glad to be here, and I look forward also to the final conversation. So my intervention is biodigital aesthetic as value system of post-Anthropocene architecture. So it is timely within the Anthropocene era more than ever to search for a non-anthropocentric mode of reasoning and consequently designing, as we can see in the project here. The Photosynthetica Consortium established in 2018 and including Ecology Studio, the Urban Morphogenesis Lab at the Bartlett and the Synthetic Landscape Lab at Innsbruck University, has therefore been pursuing architecture as a research-based practice, exploring the interdependence of digital and biological intelligence, as in the project you see here, where artificial intelligence and biological intelligence has been used to think about London in 17 years. This enables us to work directly with non-living human organisms, such as the slime here. This research focused on capturing the diagrammatic capacity of bioorganisms, their responsive behavior and growth to become part of a biocomplex urban structure. A key focus of this work is on training our sensibilities to recognize patterns of connectivity and reasoning across disciplines, to deeper understand their materiality and technological regimes, and thus expand the repertoire of aesthetic quality for our practices. Recent development in evolutionary psychology demonstrate that our sense of beauty and pleasure is part of a co-evolutionary system of our mind and its surrounding environment. In this term, human sense of beauty and pleasure has evolved as a selection mechanism, cultivating and enhancing it to compensate and integrate the function of logical thinking for gaining a systemic view of planet Earth, and the dramatic changes is currently undergoing is one of our tasks. During this brief intervention, I will try to illustrate to a series of recent projects that range from small sculpture to prototype to large master plan. I will focus on the cyanobacteria prototypical part. Our new appreciation of aesthetic in architecture has evolved into an operational tool capable to design and measure its actual ecological intelligence. By overcoming a purely stylistic reading of architectural aesthetic, this work embraces a profound computational nature of biological system, as the slime mold, considered by many a biological computer, as the act of their collective intelligence, by going through the root of the word computation, computo in Latin, thinking with, or co-thinking. But aesthetic is often absent from many urban planning discussions. However, architects and planners are often relying on a sanitized and therefore highly aestheticized vision of the world ecosystem, exemplified by the very notion of blue-green planning and this focus on regreening city. This notion might be one of the most enduring aspects that we inherited from modernity. To us, reassessing the dark side of ecologies brings up a necessity for opening up a new aesthetic of nature and as a consequence of architecture. This aesthetic connects the architectural discourse to the realm of microorganisms, such as bacteria and fungi, to create and explore their capability to turn waste and pollution into nutrients and raw material. This scalar and material domain unveil the missing link that help us to redefine the contemporary urban metabolism across scale. We explored this in a multi-scalar manner. I will now touch briefly on the Deep Green project and then focus on the prototype of photosynthetic architecture. The Deep Green explore a protocol to redesign what we have defined the urban sphere, or what we might call the urbanization of the non-human. With the development of the Deep Green that you see here applied in Guatemala City, We are testing the potential to bring at the core of architectural and urban design research the interdependence of artificial and biological intelligence. This is achieved by developing a biocomputational workflow that enables pairing what is algorithmically drawn with what is biologically grown. We explored this on a number of applications, 2 real case studies with partner city, and especially with the United Nations Development Program and their Innovation Facility Funding and City Experiment Fund. The aim of this case study is to provide local community, cities, and government with the most advanced toolset to reprogram global city for a safer and healthier post-pandemic world. We recently been developing further in conjunction to the deep learning, the GAN-Fissarion algorithm, interfacing the intelligence of slime mold with machine learning algorithm that you see applied here to the case studies of the Center Pompidou. Our biodigital, but going back to the cyanobacteria prototype, our biodigital architecture promotes an aesthetic which is centered on a novel appreciation of bacteria or microbacteria at the micro scale, as well as other forms of non-human intelligence. Within this body of work, the cultivation of these organisms become an act of what we call culturalization. An example of this culturalization is the series Hortus, which began in 2012 and is still ongoing. Hortus is the Latin term for garden, and here stands for hydro-organism responsive to urban stimuli. It refers to a series of photosynthetic sculpture and urban structure that create artificial habitat for cyanobacteria integrated into a built form. Within Hortus, cyanobacteria are deployed not only as photosynthetic machine, but they also absorb emission from building system. Hortus constitute a new active layer that is part of both urban and natural metabolic cycle, thus reconnecting what we can call the green and dark side of ecology. The latest insight of this concept is a biodigital piece called Hortus Astaxanthin, which was originally commissioned by the Centre Pompidou in Paris for the exhibition La Fabrique du Vivant, third in the series Mutation Creation. This specific installation is inspired by study on the collective behavior of coral colonies and their morphogenesis. Individual coral polyps host microalgae called zooxanthellae within their tissues. As the algae photosynthesize, it provides a metabolic flow of energy to the polyp, which in turn build their exoskeleton of calcium carbonate. More exposure to sunlight result in more rapid growth. This positive feedback loop enables the characteristic convoluted morphology of many known coral species to emerge. Hortus Astaxanthin deploy an algorithm to simulate a growth of three-dimensional substratum inspired by coral morphogenesis. The result is a set of digital meshes that are subsequently analyzed, and two of them are selected as inner and outer layer of the 3D printed substratum for the structure. Each vertex of the mesh represents a virtual version of the coral polyp. This substratum is further developed into a 3D printed structure. This structure, as in the case of the coral, is developed to support the proliferation of colony of cyanobacteria that will inhabit in its individual cell or biopixel. Each cell is therefore occupying the interstitial space between inner and outer layer. These two layers are then translated into a porous field of contour lines indexical of the incoming solar radiation. The curvilinear profile provides partial enclosure to the cell while enabling light penetration and oxygen CO2 exchange. The architectural dimension of this prototype was further explored in an exhibition that you are visiting here virtually at the Mori Gallery in Tokyo last November, which explore the relationship between biotechnology and artificial intelligence and the way we will inhabit the planet in the future. In the gallery, we exhibited Ortus against the background of Tokyo, but we explore also the architectural dimension of biosymbiosis. In this case, Ortus was suspended at the 53rd floor of the Mori Tower, and with the backdrop of Tokyo urban floor, the sculpture materialized its urban dimensions as a prototype of living architecture that we called the Photosynthetica Tower. The Photosynthetica Tower unfolds the architectural implication of Ortus as the embodiment of Tokyo evolution into a future powerhouse of biodigital architecture and technology. At the city scale, it appears as a complex systemic organism in which bacteria, autonomous farming machine, and other forms of animal intelligence become bio-citizens. Alongside humans, they all contribute to the new formation of Tokyo's own synthetic urban landscape. The integrated morphology of Photosynthetica Tower and its sheer scale promote a significant microclimatic effect. The prevailing winds generate enough draft and turbulence to force both the natural seeds and air-polluting particles through its porous skin. Each module of the skin is then activated locally to evolve in a unique function. If I'm late with time, please let me know. In order to promote the evolution of this concept, we have recently launched the Photosynthetica Venture, a transdisciplinary design innovation project. In the last 2 years, the Venture has built a series of large-scale one-to-one demonstrations of photosynthetic building membrane, sometimes also referred to as photosynthetic urban curtain. The first demonstrator was unveiled in November 2019 in Dublin, Ireland. It's 32 meters long and 7 meters high. The membrane was designed specifically for the Climate Kick, EU most prominent climate innovation initiative, aimed at accelerating the adoption of nature-based solutions to tackle the global crisis. Conceived as urban curtain, Photosynthetica captures CO2 from the atmosphere and stores it in real time at a rate of approximately 1 kilo per day, which is equivalent to 20 large trees. The Photosynthetica system integrates 3 layers of functionality: the wetware that you see here, the selection and management of microalgae, the software, the digital management system that uses sensors to optimize performance in real time. It also provides long-term projection and prediction of the system carbon capturing and air cleaning capability. The hardware that you see here, the artificial habitat for cultivation of living culture or photobioreactor. The project combines digital design and fabrication technology to optimize aesthetic quality and environmental performance into an architectural integrated system. The Biotech Hut, another case studies, almost the last one, is our first permanent photosynthetic architecture. It explores how building can be seen as not completed at the time of construction, but as an organism that keeps evolving. It was built in Astana, Kazakhstan in summer 2017 as part of the Expo and remained to the city as Museum of Biotechnology, still possible to visit it now. The Biotech Hut is 180 square meters and all is divided in 3 main areas, and in the area of the garden can host 1,600 liters of living culture of cyanobacteria. It has got a dimension, or it simulates the possible dimension of a typical apartment in London, and maybe a little bit larger. And the algae that are cultivated, through the algae that are cultivated, we are able to produce each day 1 kilogram of dry algae. This is equivalent to enable us to produce 10 kilowatts of energy per day, making the Biotech Hut energetically self-sufficient. This principle expands not only to the production of energy, but also to the quality of life and especially to food and health. Through the algae that were harvested every day, we were able to extract 600 of protein per day.
Thank you very much. Thank you. That was fascinating. Thank you guys so much. And of course, since we now open it up to a panel discussion, I would also like to give every speaker the opportunity to also ask questions to the other speakers, not only for clarification, but also really to have a conversation. So I think it is really inspiring and really great that all of you in your presentations are showing approaches to highly complex issues addressed not only with human intelligence, but also with non-human intelligence. And for me personally, I think it is really inspiring to see that you're all trying to collaborate with living organisms, which is quite radical in a time where a dead tree and a dead cow is worth more than a living one. So of course, the overarching question, as Elif already suggested, is the question, what is the new city of our generation, and what role or what can architects contribute to build this new city? So my first question is for Mitchell, and Mitch. And so the complexity of the problems that you're showing us, and this is also applicable to Claudia's problems, show very fuzzy boundaries and show the impact of architectural projects beyond conceived boundaries of the architectural envelope. So I just want to ask how you get started thinking and designing within these open-ended biological systems. Maybe you can give us a little bit of insight how some of these projects start and actually start thinking about these systems.
Yeah, it's a great question, and brilliant presentations by my fellow panel members. You know, I guess to how we start our work is, well, you know, one thing I will admit up front is that we do research, and it's very different than architectural research. I mean, there's definitely overlap, but it's a combination of studio and laboratory, which is something that Jenny Sabin is now, as I think she's sort of co-opting or owning that that space a bit. But that's been happening for some time. And when I mean laboratory, I mean an actually functional wet lab. And that's not only us. There's a few other groups doing it. We started that in around 2006. My roommate in school was a cell biologist at Harvard Medical School. And that's Oliver, Dr. Oliver Medvedik. He now runs the Kenbar Center for Biological Engineering at Cooper Union, and he is our Chief Science Officer at TerreForm. We started working with him. We're saying, how could we do that? How do you actually sit down and work side by side with someone doing cell biology or just scientists in general? And the only way to do that is to actually change the atelier, change the model of how we've been doing architecture for, I don't know, a couple centuries now. And that was actually building a space that would enable scientists to do the work that they do, bench work in a lab next to what architects do, and then share as much as we can in common with one another, and then learn viscerally what it is that, what equipment that they're using and why they're using it. So we built our first fully functional wet lab. It's now called Gen Space. Actually, it's moved on to Biotech Without Borders and a couple of other groups. But instead of buying a 3D printer, TerreForm decided to invest in building our own wet lab, and that was making our own laminar flow hood. That was making our own PCR machines. That was actually getting incubators in space for different types of cells, plant and mammalian. Actually designed the entire lab for a BSL-1 rating, which was you know, not so easy to do. We found a lot of the equipment on Craigslist and eBay, and we built what would normally be an extraordinarily expensive lab for tens of thousands of dollars. And then we worked on odd projects together, and we learned how to do failure. You know, it's just a lot of the stuff that we do, and I imagine the other groups here, we make a lot of mistakes, and real research is not knowing the answer. In architecture studio, there's always some notion or some vision of what you want to get to up front as a kind of a precursor. And it's not usually based on performance or observation, which is really how science operates. It operates in a canon. And you take knowledge that exists already and you stand on the shoulders of giants and you look to improve upon it or create a new paradigm. So we started those levels of arguments with our group and teasing out areas of science that hadn't been infected by designers and our naive questions. And so we were working with meat cells early on in this project called the In Vitro Meat House. And that was mostly trying to do things differently that you do in regenerative medicine for cancer patients and seeing if we can make shoes and belts and handbags out of it. And there was a lot of failure, but eventually we got to tuning the geometry and modifying inkjet printers so that we could print cells to shapes. And that was early on with this kind of work. And so I don't, you know, every new project we take now is really about the big questions on the environment. But that's sort of the background story, how a lot of it happened. And I don't want to talk too much because I know that my other panelists want to say many, many things.
No, thank you. I think it's really interesting because a lot of your work is and this is also the next question is for Claudia. I think it's really fascinating that you're almost like taking the role of a choreographer. You're choreographing the work of a non-human organism to create with you and work with you. And I think it's also really impressive and beautiful that you are looking at areas that many people look away from, because you are addressing issues of waste and metabolic loops, systems that are kind of not very visible to a lot of people. And I think it's really interesting that you're creating these metabolic loops basically to feed back into themselves. And my question would be, because many cities have pushed the interaction with waste and byproducts to the very peripheries in the illusion to make a cleaner city. But in a way, you know, this kind of needs to come back a little bit, and you are suggesting that there need to be more, you know, interactive loops. From your experience, what do you think is missing to integrate that in everyday life? I mean, you're showing us so many examples, but maybe on a larger city level, what have been some of the, you know, insights that you can share with us? Where are the problems in that sense?
There were different topics. I think one of the topics you touched upon is the question of regreening, and the question of how at the moment still infrastructural waste is being dealt with. And one of the main obstacles, I think, is a cultural obstacle or a methodological obstacle in the way we design and approach the design of still waste infrastructure, even in the most sustainable project. We have the impression that we still are in the paradigm that we inherited from modernism, where is the waste infrastructure, as you suggested, is zoned and segregated from the core in habitation. And at the same time, where we talk about ecology, we talk often about regreening, as if we could bring back the slider and clean a temporarily perturbed urban sphere, or a temporarily perturbed planet Earth ecology. But for us, the situation is rather different. We should deal with the intersection of natural and as well as artificial ecological cycle, which integrate also waste, bacteria, a lot of elements that might even trigger fear or reaction or unpleasant reaction to us, but that on the other end can contribute to remetabolizing some of the byproduct of the urban sphere. And therefore, through design, we could reintegrate them. So for us, a key element is how design and aesthetic become a visual language. It can really become a political, ecological language. And this is one of the main obstacles that has been overcome a little bit at the prototypical scale, at the scale of design innovation. So now in design innovation, the aspect of integration into architecture through design is taken in consideration much more seriously, provided that the design innovation actually work, but there is a consideration for integration, which is much higher than they used to be. To make it simpler, there is a bit less interest in the gadget that solve the problem and more interested in an architectural design innovation solution where the problem is actually integrated in a specific urban context, architectural context, building context, factory context. At the urban scale, with the work we have initiated with the United Nations Development Programme and the Deep Green, there is, and also with cities like Tallinn or Aarhus, this is considered very experimental, and there is quite a lot of skepticism toward design intervention. And, you know, our computation and maps, but also the pattern that can emerge from the maps, the visual language that emerges from the map could become an instrument, not only the single number, but really the capability that this high-resolution map can have in unveiling information that are impossible to be dealt with. See how stuck we are with the current pandemic, with these maps that are completely zoning the planet in red, blue, green, depending from the value of this pandemic. If we could have much higher resolution map and be able to map these differently, then we could establish eventually a more material understanding of ecological cycle and also of phenomena like the current pandemic. This will enable a local reaction to the pandemic that at the moment we cannot have. It's completely centralized, the way we respond to it. So really design has, in our opinion, a huge role in changing the way we deal with ecological cycle if we don't want to just invent a new gadget. But at the moment we are starting to have this start to become clearer and clearer in what is commonly called design innovation. It's less present in larger scale intervention. I think that is still not so clear.
Thank you. Yeah, this is very interesting because, yeah, I know from New York, for example, there's even issues on the very small scale level that, you know, Korean restaurants
I'm
can...
distracted by the chat. I don't know where do I need to...
Oh, yeah, your video stopped moving. Are you okay? Okay. No, but I thought it was really interesting because I actually know from Korean restaurant owners in New York City that even making kimchi, which you would think is a fermentation process that's at a very, very small scale, but even that in a large city like New York City is impossible. So I think it is very interesting to even just point out these issues and talk about them in public, because a lot of that awareness is not even there. Which I think is a big issue. I want to address Elif with a question actually from Neil, because you talked about the scalability and applicability to different scales. So the question from Neil Leach is, the term scalable and scalability have been used often today, but is nature really so scalable? Mm-hmm. Why are the legs of insects so thin compared to those of an elephant?
No, that's a great question. The way we approach our design problems and the way how we extract principles from nature is we are not, as you have seen, we're working with methods. We're understanding behavioral principles and working with methods. So we are not literally working with nature in that sense. We are trying to understand the natural behavioral principles so that we can apply them to architectural or technological problems. So it is not a literal, let's say, interpretation or implementation of nature. I mean, I think it's a really good question because, and we always have this discussion in MTech as well, what is scalable versus what is not scalable, but, computational techniques can be scalable, obviously. So that would be my answer. We're not literally scaling up, let's say, we're not literally scaling up natural systems. We're working with the scalability of natural principles. And I think there's a really fine line between the two. And this, I think it always needs to be reconsidered over and over again.
Thank you. And because we have a lot of questions coming in, I want to start addressing those. From Alexandra Yeshke, thank you all for inspiring designers to think from within nature. A question for Claudia. It's fascinating how we, the humans, have been able to use slime mold to compute what we struggle to do with man-made algorithms. However, slime mold responds to a limited number of environmental forces in its decision-making process. The development of a city is, of course, a product of multitude of forces. How could one start to assess the validity of the spatial solutions computed by slime mold, considering the complexity of urban forces? Could you imagine a hybrid computational process that mixes slime mold and human or computer intelligence to respond to those higher levels of complexity?
Well, on one end, there are different levels of answer. On one level, we always imagine the type of computation with the slime mold or material form of biological computation as a shift from computing through a specific tool or a system of co-designing with another organism or another form of intelligence. So it's not applying an algorithm, it's a form of co-design. And as a co-design with another organism, there are specific co-design that can be performed by collaborating with the slime mold Fusarium polycephalum, and other note is often applied to specific transport system problem, but the interest for us in slime mold is both is material intelligence, is ontological presence, but also the fact that the way the algorithm is performed is through redundancy and collective intelligence and not through optimization. The number of variables can also be pretty high from the slime mold point of view, but that is not something we necessarily take in consideration. On the aspect of interface in slime mold with digital design, yes, that is always what we have been doing with what we call the Fusarium machine or polycephalum machine. Our version, because Adamaski has made another Fusarium machine. From the computational science point of view, our is a design one. Design apparatus. So we always translate some of the information from the slime mold to a drawing or algorithm, often also through feedback loop. We have some of the apparatus have a feedback loop where data from the satellite influence the slime mold through light, food sources that are 3D printed or changes in topography. These are the information that the slime mold understands. And then these information are translated to a larger map, and then there is a feedback between the two. Lately, we have started the GAN Fusarium research, which interface slime mold with GAN Fusarium algorithm, GAN algorithm. So there is a sort of dialogue between the slime mold and the machine learning algorithm to imagine future city in specific type of issue and problematic, because again, the slime mold can be performed as a biological algorithm in certain specific type of simulation, not necessarily in others. That's where we are at with the work on Fusarium polycephalum.
Thank you. Alexandra joined us, and I have another question following that from Neil. He actually responded to that. So taking it further, can an algorithm ever model a slime mold even given that there is so little feedback from the environment? This is why I don't think that processing and other computational multi-agent systems are actually form of swarm intelligence. Claudia, did you want to respond to that?
I'm skeptical about modeling some other being, because ontologically the slime mold is the slime mold and an algorithm is the algorithm, and there will be no algorithm that can be the slime mold, or that there is no interest in having an algorithm that repeat exactly the slime mold. It would always be another element. For me, rather than transferring some of the information of the slime mold to, I don't know, a geometrical algorithm, is more interesting to create a communication between multiple algorithms, so that some of these characteristics of collective intelligence, convolutedness in performing this resource distribution could be then transposed to the design of city or larger landscape.
Thank you. And I want to, because Mitch was already kind of talking about this, we have a question from Gustavo, who's asking, maybe you can elaborate a little bit more on what you already talked about earlier. How much does your practice rely on collaboration with engineers and scientists? How are the present economics in academia and in industry shaping your work?
Yeah, well, we are, you know, I have a PhD in science, so I'm a scientist, and everyone in our team, I mean, we have designers, certainly, but we work directly with the people in that specific field of science on that, whatever project we're working on. So if it's with insects, it'd be someone in entomology. If it's someone that's doing things with, you know, like I was pointing out before, in this case, bovine cells, it would be in regenerative medicine. If it's something that works with mycelium, it's that's it's more material science. So we definitely have interdisciplinary in thinking and teams made up of very different people with different backgrounds. And it's not always easy to maintain that. And it's also, I don't think it's that new. Architecture has been doing that for a very, very long time. We're just changing the pattern of who our teammates are. As far as the industry expectations, that's actually a really great question. A lot of the funding we get comes from a number of sources. It's certainly gallery commissions and doing work with museums, but it's also grants in the sciences that are interested in bridging arts and technology with whatever some new facet of that field that we're looking at. So right now we are doing a very big grant in agriculture that's essentially agriculture for biomass, and we're translating agriculture into building materials. And this is willow production, for instance, in Germany and parts of the United States are used to pelletize the willows and make them produce energy. In that case, we're actually saving the willows and we're using them to make building facade systems. So, you know, this is working in agricultural sciences, and sure, we don't do the base work of a lot of that science, and I don't think we make any claims. We just take papers that have been published, we do a review of the literature, we see what's out there, and then we find a logic that would work well with design. And it doesn't happen overnight, it doesn't happen in a semester. So the projects that we have been operating on usually take 5 to 7 years to get out there and to make a claim that what it is that we're doing actually works. So I think it's definitely, it's a unique engagement, but I think my argument is that architects have always found relationships with people outside of their field because we're amazing at controlling the general physics. We're amazing at controlling the narrative. We are great at creating questions and then producing a system where we can help answer very complicated problems. So that's one of the kind of skill sets that architects do quite well. So it just seemed to be a natural fit. Although it's hard to pay them full time on staff, to say that there needs to be a relationship with their research to make that work reasonable for what they do.
Thank you. I have a question again from the audience from Theodore Galanos, and this is to Elif. GAs traditionally struggle with more than 2 parameters. How do you try to enable the use of these algorithms in design situations that involve a larger number of fitness parameters that need to be considered? And how does one balance the logical instability of these methods, e.g. CA, with the idea of guiding the generative process towards regions we care about efficiently?
Yeah, well, first of all, we deal with at least 3 fitness objectives when we work with GAs. It makes more sense that way. When we are dealing with obviously multiple conflicting criteria, because obviously, I mean, as the question is imposes as well, there can be 6, 7, or even more, conflicting design criteria in complex problems, and this might be applicable also to urban or to architectural or material system wide. What we then try to do is break down the problem into multiple GAs, and that also obviously brings a hierarchy to design, and it also enables us to weight, let's say, the effects or the consequences of these design objectives. So it really depends on the design problem. But yeah, our main approach is to create a hierarchical approach to design, and that is through breaking down the problems into multiple stages and running these algorithms iteratively in multiple stages, basically.
Thank you. And now we have an open question from Marina Rodriguez-Daneves. Amazing presentations. I would like to ask about the life of these designs. Are these open designs that can be reinformed over time by humans and non-humans? How do you think they will do it? So basically the aging process. Do you simulate their futures? Do you let them grow with their own intelligence?
Maybe I can start from
Okay.
our end. So the way, again, we approach design problems is we try to think about, let's say, the future 100 years when we formulate our design problems. So how is this architectural solution, evolve over time? And that is through obviously thinking about the changing environmental and contextual parameters such as, population change, density change, or the climate, the effects of climate change. I mean, there are a lot of resources you can access, right? So you can find a lot of information about, for example, how will sea level rise affect a certain city or region in the next 50 or 100 years. So we take into consideration all of these, scientific data that we can access, and we formulate our architectural solutions in that fashion, basically. How the design is going to evolve over 100 years.
Yeah, that depends also from scales. For example, while working at the urban scale, and especially with some of the research in UCL, we often apply a time frame that span from the local condition to up to 70, 100 year, 150, depending from the specific climate scenarios we are looking at, whether it's related to question of flooding that 70, 100 years, question of recycling of waste with a shorter time frame, and etc. So that is what we usually use as time frame at the larger scale. For what instead the prototypical aspects are concerned, so for example, architectural, photosynthetic architectural prototype, the sort of time frame we look at is different. It's not a question of predicting how it will change, it's a question of understanding the material language of microalgae. If there is not an understanding of the behavior and how the system will perform under different conditions or will start to behave under different conditions, so there is not an understanding of the system. So the shift is at that scale is from a geometrical understanding of architecture to a behavioral understanding of architecture. So there is not a precise prediction of how the pattern will change geometrically, but there is a prediction of how the behavior will evolve in time. And there is a testing of that, which is material for a certain, lifespan up to 1 year, and a set of simulation that will allow us to predict how it will evolve in more here. Then depending with the material we work with, there is also a prediction of when a certain gardening operation is required. So there is a protocol of gardening that can be weekly, daily, monthly, yearly, every 10 years, depending from the part of the system we are working with. For example, spirulina need to be harvested every week, ideally, or every 2 weeks. It needs nutrients in another time, and etc. While the overall system, if is made with bioplastic, for example, depending from the bioplastic we are considering, because as you know, also PLA is considered a bioplastic, but there can be bioplastic which is totally biodegradable, like the one you see behind me. And so there might be element of the system or of the substratum that need this operation of gardening or maintenance or replacement or reprinting or reconstruction, again, every 5 years, 10 years, 50 years, depending from the type of material we are considering. So depending from the scale we are working with, there are different type of element of change and behavior that we work with. But there is not really a condition when you let the system behave unknownly, because then you have not designed the system. In the moment you know the system, you have an understanding of the behavior and how to react to the behavior. There is not an unknown type of condition of the behavior. I don't know if that clarifies.
Yeah, I think that's very interesting, because the thinking about timescales of different organisms and how they become part of a system that you as a designer are curating. I mean, it's interesting because I think, where does the design come in and where does it stop? Like, how much agency does it have is a very interesting thing. And I think the struggle in our current time is the long-term thinking or having like there were certain indigenous cultures that would think 7 generations ahead. And I think it's interesting to actually have to to operate with different timescales and time that is specific to certain organisms. I don't know if Mitch, what role does timescale and organisms, different timescale, you were working with crickets, how does that play into your work?
Yeah, I mean, I enjoyed the answers from both the panelists, and you know, my question or my answer might be a little bit more simple. We're using, I guess, applied research. So everything that we're operating on is more or less knowable, and that the observations and the facts that were out there already existed. So it's very hard to say, you know, that we're discovering things that we haven't seen yet. Or I can also say that anything that we think we can grow or produce that evolves really isn't evolving, is it? It's predetermined by the set of rules that we created ourselves. It's a matrix. I mean, all of computation. I mean, there's no thinking, breathing, sentient system in computation. There is no real artificial intelligence yet. I mean, maybe in quantum versions of it, we can get there. We have machine learning that's very valid. We have types of AI that do certain tasks, but architects don't really have access to that level of machinery and coding, nor are we that skilled. I mean, from a computational perspective, we're very young, and we're not as nuanced or as deeply theoretical as folks working in that field. And even if we were, I would never consider a computer a partner, or any algorithm or any other system, nor can any system that I've ever seen mirror the effects of the context that you would need to get real results in evolution. The context meaning the world model. So you could think about the evolution of something as simple as a tree if you design a computer model to show a tree evolving. That's not real. That's not a real model. That's one object or one artifact. In order to get a true evolutionary model of a tree, you would have to model everything around it. That would be precipitation, rainfall, soil acidity. If a young deer comes and starts to eat the bark, wind flow, and this is over, what, 50 years just for a single tree. Every single model we have of a tree is based on something like Lindemeyer systems or some basic code that gives you the morphology of that organism, but not the actual organism as it's growing. And I think we know this. It's simulacra. It's by no means a form of evolution or any kind of genetic code. We're not there yet. We want to get there, but they're mimesis. So it's convincing on a visual level, but there's things that we can learn from it that are valid, especially in architecture. But I don't think we're getting any deeper than Avatar and James Cameron. We're making very beautiful things that look like convincing species of other stuff, but they're formed from observations we've got in nature and translated into some code, and then we are able to get a lot of recursion out of it and think we're doing something novel. Not quite there yet. We just don't have the power. We've set the rules up to do it. We can certainly imagine and project and speculate. Those are all valid terms, but we just don't have the power to do real evolution yet. So the organisms that we work with are also not necessarily evolving. I mean, they've already evolved for tens of millions of years. So we're not changing crickets or their behavior, nor can we really do that just yet. Well, we're not interested in doing that. We're interested in actually getting them to survive, to be in an environment where it's fertile and supportive, so they can reproduce and in some level be functional for humans. And the last thing maybe I'll mention is we've also been working with caddisflies. One of the things that they do is they make these amazing larval cases. They're real embodied computation. Because here's a creature that has mandiblades, and they produce a silk, like spider silk, under fresh water, and they find random objects around themselves, and they create this incredible underwater architecture that fits their body and the kind of the body's constraints, because they can only move so far. We've been training them to use microplastics instead of things like bits of shells or weeds. And that just is creating an artificial environment for them where we remove what they would naturally use as a defense mechanism for their larval casing and replace it with nothing but plastic waste. So over time, over many generations, they learn to use it as a protective shell. So I guess in that sense, we're tweaking nature and we're evolving it, but not evolving it that far, at least not in, I think, a deep Darwinistic sense. But those are things that in architecture, I think we can do, and we can take things that we know that are applied, and we can gently alter them, but not necessarily real evolution. I don't know. That's my thoughts on it. Maybe you guys have different thoughts.
Did Claudia, Elif, did you want to respond to that? Or should we go to the next question?
Maybe I can respond to that. I mean, obviously, I mean, in our case, at least, obviously, we're not talking about, real evolution, but we're talking about, a computer science field that has been developing since at least the 1950s. And, there's obviously, as you would know, a lot of literature on that. So it cannot be about real evolution. It is a technique, it's a method that we can take as designers and can use as designers to be able to ask the right questions about design and to be able to identify what parameters about design that we can address through these algorithms and how we can really formulate, like I said earlier as well, hierarchical design problems. So it's really about formulating the design problem first. And that's really why we use these methods. It's obvious it's not about real evolution. It's really about generating different options, different candidates, and to be able to look at those candidates, try to understand them, their performance, and analyze them. So yeah, that would be my answer, at least from our perspective, from the research that we conduct in MTech.
Yeah, I on this line, I don't see instead the difference between the real and the virtual. I see a difference between the material and the digital. So there are multiple forms of behavior and transformation. Some are material and some are digital, but not necessarily a tree that evolved through hundreds of years for me is more relevant than element that has been modified by human interaction of form of artificial intelligence. I don't see something that not nature as something validating reality. I see a difference between the material and the digital. And I see multiple forms of intelligence. That's why I talk about collaboration. I believe there are forms of collaboration that we can establish with biological intelligence as well as form of artificial intelligence. So I totally agree with Mitch on the point that we are not going to reproduce natural form of evolution through artificial one. And I also don't see the point. I don't see the point of reproduction. I mean, artificial form of evolution are things on its own. They don't need to reproduce natural form of evolution. On the other hand, I do see myself collaborating with machine learning, artificial intelligence, form of artificial intelligence that can be both biological and digital. That could happen, although I agree, probably there are elements of science that might be deeper than the one that designer are integrating. Still, I think there is a relevance in integrating this form of knowledge in design by really working on the relationship between multiple systems. If that answer, I don't think Mitch really made a question, but yeah.
So. Thank you. Thank you. I want to bring in one question from the YouTube chat. So she is asking, I'm Catalina, engineering student from Chile. Do you envision biodesign to be the norm of design in the future, even for the smallest thing?
Yeah, I wrote a book on it. So it's literally called Biodesign on Actar. So I think concrete, glass, and steel had their century. So maybe we should start thinking about other things. There's a lot of room in nanotech, robotics, and certainly synthetic biology or biology in general. We've just started. It's really at this nascent level. So there's a lot of room for our generation and a new generation to tackle this as a topic. Also because we, as a species, need to fight issues of climate change. And it seems like if we're going to reduce ourselves to being carbon neutral, or actually think of a positive model where we're not only getting rid of the carbon issue, but actually solving issues about pollution and creating a civilization 2.0 that's in the fitness with the Earth's metabolism, I think we need to look deeper at biological processes so that we have designs that fit with our planet. And that's not necessarily going to come from these sort of efficiency models of making better concrete buildings. Not that I'm against that, there might be a way of doing it, but I think we need to open the avenue for exploration and research in other areas.
Thank you. And I have another question from Elizabeth Tuck from the YouTube channel. I'm curious if and how the pandemic has influenced your thinking about design, whether that's understanding human mobility in cities, work from home, communication system, etc., etc. So have you had any new inspirations for your work from the current time we are in? Or is it something you've already kind of thought about before, maybe have been aware of, have heard the warnings before?
Sorry, I was reading the question that keep popping up and I got distracted. I don't know what you asked. Sorry about that.
I'm sorry. I also wanted to say I'm going to read the questions because I tried to curate it.
Popping up, and so I read them and I can, yeah, go for it.
So yeah, maybe you can share a little bit about your own experience of the pandemic, and has it impacted your thoughts and your project, or is it something you've already been aware of? I mean, a lot of conscious people have already kind of warned us about the pandemic and us pushing our infrastructures more and more into natural environments. So maybe it's something you've already kind of been aware of. It might happen, but maybe you can share a little bit about your story and your thoughts on the pandemic.
Well, it's difficult to comment on something that just happened and a very insightful reflection. But of course, the pandemic plays so many of the aspects that biodesigners are working on, such as the relationship between the natural or the artificial, or some of the topic on future food, both few of the presenters today touch upon, because if food production would eventually be more embedded, integrated, distributed, and innovative, then maybe we would not have this disruptive event happening. So I often say, we need to deal with climate change. I agree, but the change is an inherent quality of the planet we inhabit. There is Greek philosophers said many, many years ago, nothing change but change. So the question is not how we stop change, because we cannot. We cannot preserve ecologies, we cannot stop change. The question is, how do we understand change, read the change, and deal with it in a way to establish positive dynamic rather than disrupted one, that are the one of which we are victim at the moment. So on a more practical level, of course, design innovation can help in providing different source of food protein, such as microalgae or cricket or other source of local food protein embedded into architectural prototype. Digital design and computation can contribute by mapping both the spread of the virus, then the movement of people, then that all the parameters that are related to vulnerability and spreadability of the virus. This could be possible and could allow us to have a totally different spatial reaction to the pandemic, because I believe the spatial reaction we have at the moment is from last centuries. Viruses are systemic organisms, they don't stop on a door, right? So the question is, how do we map them, understand the system, and react to the system locally and globally? So these are two answers that design could actually give or start to give to these issues. And we will have others. Elif before mentioned flooding. Flooding is the next big prediction that scientists are making in terms of climate change. So how do we react to those? How do we read them more materially and provide both a wider reading through computation, that local solution through biodesign and innovation and biotechnology? These are two elements that I think are really important.
Maybe if I go ahead.
Who's going? Me or?
Yeah, go ahead.
I'll just say real quickly, I think the pandemic, as far as the influence it'll have on architecture, I think it'll be enormous. I think we're recognizing that as a society, humans are one biology. And this pandemic is killing every single one of us, regardless of your nation, your background, your ethnicity, in many cases, your age. It is a danger to all of us. And it is the first real crisis, I think, in our time, that we have a chance to come together and fight it. And architects will have a major role in helping develop the logic and the strategy on the way forward, not only for the next virus, but for problems that affect all of us. And I think we are more than capable on producing in-depth solutions. So I think that this is, we've been arguing for a very long time that we've always wanted a crisis. We've had various ones, but this seems to be the mother of all crises. So I think we're going to work very hard for a very long time to make sure that we get it right.
Yes, and a follow-up question from Gustavo on that, kind of connected to it, because we are seeing a lot of change in economics, government policy and laws. And so Gustavo was asking, how can architects aid in ecological movements to change the economics, governmental policies and laws? So how can we get engaged, I guess is the question. And you already show this, but maybe you can say a few words to that.
I think it depends on the architect you are. Some of us are obsessed with, material or tectonics, etc. Others are moving into this field where activism is very much a new kind of architecture. Well, actually, it's been around since the 60s. It's just changing its topic. So certainly getting involved in matters of state and policy is something that is almost a natural fit. It's not necessarily things that build up your portfolio, but it's an argument for a new direction. A recent example is design for the other 90%, which was done at the Cooper Hewitt, et cetera, which is when architects started saying, we're not interested in creating decadent objects that beautify existing conditions, but we're interested in using the power of invention and the kind of the tools of our imagination to offer, solutions that help citizens of this planet. And the design for the other 90% movement and various other movements like it, early versions of architecture for humanity, these are activist-based architectures. And there's a ton of examples that are out there. It's really doing the hard work of finding out what the cause is that you want to represent, and then seeing how best you could offer your insight and your efforts to not only radicalizing it, but creating a solution that works.
Yeah, I think it's really important to act again. I always have at least two levels, sorry, but I think it's really important to think about this in two levels. On the immediate level, as I said before, design innovation is a niche in which we can operate. We are at the moment working with GSK and with other companies to try and develop prototypes that can really be actualized. Now, in working with ecological system, on the long term, I think also politicians need to make an effort on rethinking politics from a non-anthropocentric point of view. What does activism mean if we are not the species that necessarily control the planet? which kind of politics can emerge, which is not about the last century left and right politics, but is about parties that are really giving an agencies to non-human species. So this is something that an architect can provoke, but not necessarily give the solution. This is something that entails politicians to rethink politics. But for the now, what we can contribute, and I think we really have a space, is into design innovation. We can create collaboration with the traditional corporate system that are traditionally the bad guy, but in this case are the ones that are starting to make a move, I think, in changing and the solution that we have from solutions that are not taking in consideration ecology and behavioral ecology to solutions that integrate biology and behavioral ecology. I think this is something we can do now, but on the long term, we should reframe the concept of politics as well.
I think this is something that also deals with architectural education. We need to think about the future of architectural education and what kind of, let's say, skills are we going to equip our students with. And when I say skills, it's not about, let's say, technical skills or computational skills, so on and so forth, but it's really about gaining an understanding of real world problems. So, obviously we are not going to be, let's say, lawyers or economists and so on and so forth, but students, we need to educate the students so they gain an understanding of the pressing issues in the world. So I do think that we need to rethink the role of architectural education in all of this, because, it all starts with education. Everything we do has started with our own education, right? And of course, there might be different answers, different approaches. As you know, there are, a lot of different architecture schools with who put emphasis on, let's say, different aspects. But one thing that can unify, let's say, all these different answers is perhaps, gaining a better understanding of the world that we live in and how we can address those issues, even if we address them in different ways.
Yes, thank you. And since Alexandra joined us, and I know she also has a lot of research in directions that we're going in, I would like to invite her to maybe, contribute, ask a question if you want to, or, join us in some way.
Thank you, Viktoria. I think I've already asked my question. I'm really amazed with the work that you guys are doing, and especially I think what's really valuable is bringing real science to design and somehow making architects understand, architects and designers. I work with architects. I educate architects now. That there are no shortcuts here. And that it takes really a long time to do real science. And I really appreciated, that Mitch mentioned that it sometimes takes 5 to 7 years, not a semester of a design studio, to actually come up with a solution that really engages design with life. And I hope that somehow we manage to find more frameworks for that in the design world, in the academia, to create space for that, because it's really hard. Very often we don't do projects just because of that time constraint. So I really admire how you guys, collaborate and manage to create those frameworks. And I think maybe what would be really useful to, discuss for a moment, and I see a question like that somewhere here, is how you get to a place, how you actually build up, your path from being an architect or an engineer or a scientist to working with designers and contributing to the design field and making people more and more aware of the importance of living systems. What were your paths? I mean, maybe especially Mitch, since you said you're a scientist, you ended up in this design world. How did you end up there?
How did I end up? I certainly appreciate the question. I'm not sure if I've ended up anywhere. I'm still figuring it out. I think I've had 3 or 4 careers in my lifetime thus far, and I think that's becoming more the norm. I think students that are out there, they can expect just changing, their direction, major shifts every 10 years or so. That's probably going to happen because the technology will be different, or your what inspires you will be different, or your location will be different, or a combination of all three of those things. And your education and your background certainly helps you facilitate those changes. I wouldn't suggest doing what I did, which is I ended up going to school for a very long time. Yeah, don't do that. I really that wasn't the best way, but I ended up doing 2 master degrees and then a PhD, and going from private practice to nonprofit work, and learning and realizing actually everything I've done since I graduate has been about finance on some level. So you probably should just get a business degree on top of it. I know some colleagues of mine have been architects for 20 plus years, gone back to school to get an MBA, and because they just are being overridden by clients and contracts and the real stuff that we don't pay attention to in architecture school. And I don't really think there's anything intellectual in that. It's just reality when you try and do this work. If you're not capable of that language and communicating at that level and understand that nuance, it definitely affects how you can continue doing your work, whether it's raising money or managing an office or finding a strong relationship with client. That actually is a lot of business skills that I had 13 years of college and 1 semester of 1 class in professional practice. And it's been a lot of my work since, so at least my effort. And so I didn't want to really go there. I know there's an enormous amount of discussion about biodesign here in the chat. It's almost overwhelming, but there's a background reality to making an office function and to get to where you want to get to in one's pursuit. I think first and foremost, I'll follow the logic that we have at NYU. I'm a professor of individualized study. So every single student, student gets a customized form of education, where essentially they choose their own verse of what their pedagogical interests are. And they're guided directly one-to-one with a experienced advisor, a full-time faculty member, usually a senior professor. And that is an intense way of educating people, but it does give them the kind of the guidance and helps them build their curiosity and gives them the direction they need to discover something totally new. Because there's no such thing as a one-size-fits-all way of thinking, whether it's for architecture, law, medicine. There's definitely fundamentals that we need to get right, but education itself, I think at some point, the students really need to follow their passions as well as build up skills and understand how things work. So as much as possible, you've got to do the work that's out there to understand what makes architects tick, but it's not going to be helpful unless you find your own poetry in it and your own sort of idiom.
Yeah, I agree, and especially picking up on the point when Mitch talked about the multiple degree and said you don't necessarily need to do that. I would say the opposite. I think you actually should do that, because because in a way also the definition of the discipline is something we have crafted in the last 200 years. Before, in the Renaissance, there were no such, for example, such disciplinary domain. And I think it's about time to redescribe this disciplinary domain. I also have a bit of a mixed background. I think many have. I have a diploma. I have a degree on environmental engineering, one in architecture, and one in drama school. I have to say drama school, I don't use it too much, but but the other two have been kind of collaborating quite well. We'll see when to integrate drama at some point. The other two have been quite, collaborating one with the other. Both, I mean, the environmental engineering, which is the first one I did, of course, contribute on the side of knowing some of the environmental parameter, but also on the side of management. We did a lot of management then, so that, of course, contribute. And I often get to this question of how do you collaborate? Why you need to rely on biologists? Yes, I do collaborate with many other people, biologists, artists, business, professional, economists. But the question is, how do you craft a profession for which you hold a certain knowledge that is multiple and multi-layer and doesn't, in my opinion, stay on a single disciplinary boundary. So there is some knowledge of biology which I hold, and there is some knowledge of computation that I hold, which is different from one biologist hold, but is part of my know-how and is part of my discipline that cannot fit precisely in the disciplinary domain of architecture as it is defined at the moment. So I think it's really important to be able to craft the profession and be able to integrate multiple skills in a professional manner without completely relying on consultant, by being able to integrate this parallel skill to craft a discipline which is somehow a declination of an ideal prototype. It's not relying on a too rigid definition. And somehow is like talking about a systemic definition of the profession that doesn't rely on positivistic idea of profession as something specialized on only one aspect of reality, but it's something that is able to embrace multiple knowledge and integrate them in a single output. I leave to continue.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with both of you, because I'm not sure actually if there's one way of, let's say, approaching this. I mean, I also studied a lot. I have a PhD as well, but there might be other paths. Like someone might be more involved in practice, for example. I mean, I guess we all formulate our paths, in time. When I did my PhD, because of the topic of my PhD, it dealt a lot with structural engineering. So, I started reading a lot about structural engineering, and, that was the kind of, that was the way where I stepped into a different discipline. And today, when I work with engineers, so on and so forth, we have a common language. So I really think it's about generating that common language. And yes, you do need to understand a little bit of everything in order to do that, in order to be able to communicate with people. Yeah, so I agree with both responses.
Let me just get a little bit further down this road. I'm just thinking, like, if you compare education in the sciences to education in architecture, you have some interesting parallels and some points of tension. So in science, your main objective is to learn exactly the way something was done before, replicate it identically, and then work very hard to show some level of change or some level of improvement. And then you publish a paper and you've made your contribution, hopefully an original contribution to that field. And if you think about what we do in architecture and you translate that, that would mean something to the effect of taking your student in studio, and then having them study Bilbao, the one in the Guggenheim, and replicating every single step so that the student shows, improves knowledge and awareness of knowledge of how that building was achieved, and all of the technological feats, material feats, even urban design feats, and what it means as a composition. And then they represent it as a project where they then prove to their faculty that not only do they know how to reproduce Bilbao, but that they've improved it incrementally just a bit, enough so that it's significant that you would have, if you were to do Bilbao again, this would be the improvement. And I can't imagine a studio critique where a student stands up and shows us Bilbao and there's subtle improvement. That would be a great learning experience and very valid for the student. I will agree with that. But at the same time, there is this thing we do in architecture, this sort of reinventing the wheel or the idea of design at some point needs to be original or innovative or different or radical or think of some adjective that describes it. And that I do believe is a part of the field as well. We have this kind of way of juxtaposing the inobvious and coming up with something that's just almost never thought of before, but slightly borrowed from everything else. And I don't think we could teach architecture the way I previously described, or copying Bilbao and making small changes. But there is something valid in doing that. So I guess I'm not backtracking on what I said, but I'm kind of clarifying it and understanding both the points that are being made, because there's the problem with architecture is that there's just so much to know, and then even when you're finished with school, you're nowhere near finished with learning design. It's a lifelong pursuit.
Thank you. Yes, I think everyone has their own path, and I think it's really beautiful to see how ideas and projects unfold very individually. And I think that's a really great way to describe also, your projects have these fuzzy boundaries, and every path of every individual, not only the non-human organisms, even us, we as designers have our very individual path, and I think it's beautiful. So if you don't mind, I would stick around a little bit longer, whoever has to leave, but it's been an amazing session and we have so many questions. So if our speakers are able to stay a little bit longer to answer a few more questions, that would be great, but please don't feel pressured. So with that said, I would like to ask one more question about fabrication, which Sina Mustafavi asked. So how do you define the role of fabrication in biodesign or bio-friendly architecture? Do you think we can rely on digital fabrication in high resolution, numerical controlled manufacturing, or the framework of biofabrication can and need to be fundamentally different? Do you think, Elif, maybe you can speak to the aspect of fabrication. I can also repeat the question, it was a bit difficult. How do you define the role of fabrication in biodesign or bio-friendly architecture? Do you think we can rely on digital fabrication in high resolution numerical controlled manufacturing, or the framework of biofabrication can and need to be fundamentally different?
I don't think biodesign and, let's say, advanced digital fabrication, robotic fabrication, I don't think these are mutually exclusive. I didn't have a chance to show today, but as you might know, we work a lot with robotic fabrication techniques as well in MTech in our research, and my individual research is also heavily relying on actually digital prototyping with robots. I think it's about how you approach material systems, and digital fabrication is just a tool for us to use. So that's why they are not mutually exclusive. You can use any tool. You can do it by hand. You can do it with a CNC router or a robot, but it's really about the material system and understanding the material system, the properties of the material system. Even with something so abundant as timber, let's say, if you do not design according to the material properties of timber, then that system is going to fail. And you might be using really advanced techniques, but if you are not, let's say, taking into consideration the material grain, for example, of timber, then it's going to fail anyway. So it's, material properties, structure, fabrication, these all go hand in hand. So yeah, I think, one needs to kind of construct a holistic approach into this.
Thank you.
Yeah, I don't see any conflict between digital fabrication and biodesign. I think, again, we wish to work in a sort of context or framework in which eventually we would have intelligence machine as well, biological organism collaborating and evolving inside of the building. But the two paradigms are not in conflict. Like the project Ortus we presented is exactly an exploration of how both robotic fabrication, 3D printing can be synergic with biological organism and biodigital architecture. Yeah.
Thank you. Mitch, did you want to say something? Sorry.
I actually agreed with Elif's answer and Claudia as well. Like I don't know if I could even add to that. I think they both nailed it. I completely agree.
Thank you. And I want to take one last question from Theodorus, which is a bit of a more philosophical and more wider angle here, but I think it could be a beautiful way to end the session. So the idea of nature as something to be preserved, at least in the West, seems to be a symptom of our terrible impact on the environment the last 200 years or so. How could, or maybe should, we think of a biodesign that abstract the biological to gain new functional insights versus a biodesign that flirts with the idea of a return to nature? That's a big question, so.
Nature does not exist, quote, Zizek. Mitch, you can go, I can add later.
Yeah, no.
Nature is everything, quote Spinoza.
Well, I mean, you can get stuck on that term nature. Unfortunately, as soon as you bring that up, it's just I mean, where we go deep into the realm of the philosophical, and you know, I've written a piece on definitions of nature and design. I think that it's 10 archetypes of nature. There's so many different variants and meaning of the term that it's almost useless. And Timothy Morton, if we're going to bring up another thinker, he actually has said, you know, it's ecology, not nature. There's a book that he's written on that very topic. In this case, he's saying that there's predictive sciences and tools and instrumentation and methods that are used in specifically ecology that help define ideas of nature in and around certain contexts and functions. And that's much more useful in a conversation, especially when it comes to development or architecture, than larger ideas of nature or sprawling, endless interpretations of it, from behavior to poetics to, you know, extraterrestrial thoughts about nature elsewhere. So I think it's really how you frame that term that then helps you set up your constraints for where you would operate or successfully do or create a project. So I actually love wrestling with it often, and I think we could probably have a unified set of terms or a code on nature and its meaning. But I defer actually to the work that we do. We have a totally different name. We call it socio-ecological, which is a mouthful, and it's not great for branding, but it does really recognize that there's the ecological side, which is the science side, which helps us answer issues in application engineering, and then there is the social side, which is the capricious public and our questionable leadership class, what their what their reasons are, what their influences are for why we do the things that we do. So socio-ecological design is really how we see, how we operate, that we can author the ecological and the engineering side, but we don't author the socio. That's something that's what humans do when they're confronting a design.
Thank you. I think there was a question, maybe each of you can kind of, you know, I mean, I want to give you time to answer the question, but maybe you can add to that a recommendation for younger students that kind of want to wrestle with these ideas. What kind of book besides your own would you recommend for students to read if they want to wrestle with it? Because I think it's an interesting way to think about it, by basically getting into this kind of discourse with yourself about certain terms to kind of like broaden your horizon and think about new ways of approaching these issues. So yeah, we see in the chat Manuel Delanda. I don't know if Mitch, if you have any other suggestions. You said Timothy Morton, Delanda.
Yeah, well, for students, I think they should start with, almost anything that inspires them. I would say Henry David Thoreau and Walden, and learn about wildness and living life deliberately, understanding the economics of nature and civil disobedience. This is a book that influenced Gandhi and Martin Luther King. It is a tremendous piece of American intellectualism. And I think it branches out to so many different fields and thoughts. So I would start with Walden and Thoreau's ideas of nature and just spending time. You have to remember the book was predicated on the idea that we can write books that go beyond interests of human drama. So he found interests in the drama of a reflection of a lake, or a gossamer-like strand from a spider's web, or the changing colors of leaves, and that became characters in his books. One of the first examples of that, where nature is the kind of the lead topic, and it's beautifully written. And there's a lot to say about Thoreau, but I think he'd be a great kind of foundational, sort of figure to look at.
Thank you. Maybe Claudia or Elif, did you want to respond to the nature question and give some references that help you think?
Yeah, just to add to that, Sciences of the Artificial, Herbert Simon, I think that's a great book. I mean, this is also something that we, suggest to our students, because it talks about it defines what artificial is. And also this goes back to the question of the nature, because, artificial comes from artifacts. So artifacts are also part of nature. We are part of nature. And so we need to, approach what we build as not something that is separate from nature, but we need to understand that through our building, processes, we are also somehow either contributing or taking away from the nature. So I would highly recommend Sciences of the Artificial. Of course, I would recommend books by Michael Weinstock, who is the founding director of MTech. He's a really good reference in this field as well. Yeah, I guess.
Thank you.
Well, so my reference usually on this conversation are mainly Gregory Bateson. There is a short, Neil Leach just suggested Ciro Nagile. There are a few publications from him that are really relevant and connect to architecture and also to the idea of Gregory Bateson that we discussed at the AA at the time, in particular steps to an ecology of mind. And there is a small chapter called Style, Grace in Aboriginal art in this book, which is really relevant and discuss meta-language and ecologies, not as sustainability, but as an interconnection of mind. So this is really relevant on the topic. Then two other references that are also really important on setting up these are, of course, Timothy Morton, Ecology Without Nature, and Slavoj Žižek on ecology, when the concept of nature does not exist is discussed. This is actually a documentary, and can be found online. It's from 2016, 2017, but there is also the little abstract from the documentary that can be read. As we are talking about holiday, I think though that a good reading, and this is my last suggestion, is Discognition from Steven Shapiro. He actually discussed intelligence, the intelligence from the point of view of artificial intelligence, human as also thinking like slime mold. That is the last chapter, so I couldn't avoid discussing this. And I think by talking about cognition, the book discusses in some implicit way the role of natural and artificial in the world we inhabit. And it's a quite narrative book, related to science fiction. It is not usually my favorite type of book, but the way it relates to it, I think, is quite clever. So for the holiday, my suggestion is Discognition from Steven Shapiro. Then you can also check the other reference after the holiday, more sort of intellectual and philosophical. Thank you.
Thank you. This is a beautiful way to end the session, I think, with giving people, references that they can read for themselves and kind of embed themselves more in the thoughts that we've discussed today. So I want to really thank everyone for participating. Special thanks to all three of you presenting your work and discussing with us today. So thank you very much. And to everyone that celebrates, happy holidays. And we'll be back next Saturday with another session. So, but this is it for today. So thank you for all your great contributions and your great project. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Bye-bye.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you. Thank you. Loved it.
Bye.
Thank you.